The Arizona Territory did not greet Clara Whitmore kindly. The land stretched wide and unforgiving, a sea of dust and stone that shimmered beneath the sun like a warning rather than a welcome. Clara tightened her grip on the reins as her wagon creaked along the narrow trail, each jolt reminding her how far she was from the green hills of Pennsylvania and from the life she had once believed was meant for her. She had come west to teach. That was what she told herself when doubt crept in during the long miles. A proper schoolhouse, even a small one, was a promise of order in a place that thrived on chaos. Children needed letters and numbers as much as water, she believed. Education, after all, was civilization's quiet shield, yet beneath that purpose lay a wound she had not named aloud. 2 years earlier, Clara had buried her fiancé after a railway accident, along with her trust in a predictable future. The East had grown unbearable after that, too familiar, too full of reminders. When the notice arrived asking for a schoolteacher in a border town near Apache lands, she accepted before fear could catch up with her resolve. Fear, however, had followed her anyway. The driver who brought her part of the way warned her in hushed tones. The innkeeper repeated stories meant to frighten. Even the minister who blessed her journey had spoken carefully of the dangers beyond the settlements. Again and again, the same word surfaced in every conversation. Apache. By the time Clara traveled alone, those warnings weighed heavier than her trunks. The trail narrowed as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the rocks. When the wagon wheel struck a hidden stone and cracked with a sharp report, Clara's breath caught. The horses spooked, and she barely managed to calm them before the silence returned thick and watchful. She climbed down, skirts brushing against the dust, and examined the damage. The wheel was split clean through. Night was coming fast. Her heart pounded. She had been told never to stop here, never to linger, never to trust the quiet. The wind stirred then, weaving through the canyon like a breath. Clara froze as she heard it, not quite a voice, not quite sound. A whisper that seemed to brush the edge of her thoughts rather than her ears. Steady. She turned sharply, scanning the rocks. No one stood there. Still, the fear she expected did not fully come. Instead, a strange calm settled over her. Fragile but real. Again the wind moved. Follow the land, not the road. Clara swallowed hard. She told herself it was exhaustion, the heat, the loneliness of travel. But as darkness crept closer, instinct guided her steps. She gathered what she could and followed a narrow path away from the wagon, leading toward a stand of mesquite trees that offered shelter from the open sky. She did not know she was being watched from high ground. An Apache scout observed the broken wagon, the frightened woman, and the careless trail that had nearly led her into danger. He did not approach. He did not speak. He simply shifted stones in a way that would steer predators and men away from her camp. Clara built a small fire, her hands trembling. She thought of the stories she had been told and wondered how much of her fear had been borrowed from others who had never set foot on this land. As she lay awake beneath the stars, the whisper came again, not in words this time, but in feeling. A presence that did not demand, did not threaten, did not harm. For the first time since she had left home, Clara slept. When morning came, she found fresh water nearby and her horses calm and unharmed. The broken wheel remained, but danger had passed. She did not understand why, yet something within her shifted. The frontier had wounded her. Yes, but it had also spared her. And somewhere in the quiet canyons of the West, a whisper had begun, soft, patient, and waiting to be heard again. Clara Whitmore had been raised to believe that silence meant danger. Back east, silence followed bad news, empty chairs, and graves freshly turned. But on the Arizona frontier, silence was everywhere, stretching across mesas, curling through canyons, and settling into the bones of the land itself. After the night beside the broken wagon, Clara began to understand that this silence was not empty. It was watchful. She repaired what she could and walked the remaining miles to the border town with dust on her hem and questions in her heart. The townsfolk listened with tight expressions as she described the cracked wheel and the untouched horses. "You were lucky," one man said flatly. "Or cursed," another muttered. No one spoke of protection. No one spoke of guidance. They spoke only of Apaches. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a modest wooden structure facing the open land as if bracing itself. Clara unpacked her books, chalk, and slate boards, determined to anchor herself in routine. Children arrived barefoot and curious, their eyes full of questions they did not yet know how to ask. Still, the whisper followed her, not in sound, but in moments when the wind shifted suddenly, when her path curved without her meaning it to, when unease rose and then settled without reason. Again and again, she felt guided rather than watched. One afternoon, while gathering firewood beyond the town boundary, Clara strayed farther than intended. The land dipped into a canyon where sunlight softened and the air cooled. She realized too late that she had lost sight of the trail. Fear returned swift and sharp. That was when she saw him. He stood several paces away, partially hidden by stone and shadow, as if the canyon itself had shaped him. He carried no raised weapon, made no sudden movement. His presence was calm, deliberate. Apache. Every warning she had ever heard surged forward, but none of them matched the man before her. His dark eyes studied her not with threat, but with careful assessment, like one who reads weather rather than emotion. "You should not be here alone," he said at last. His voice was low, steady, and unmistakably real. Clara's hands clenched around the bundle of wood. "I was only lost," he finished, not unkindly. She nodded. He gestured toward a narrow path that curved between the rocks. "The land opens there. Follow it. It will take you back." She hesitated. Everything she had been taught screamed against trusting him. Yet the whisper, the same quiet certainty she had felt the night of the broken wagon, settled over her once more. "Thank you," she said, surprising herself. He inclined his head slightly, already stepping back. "Listen to the ground next time. It speaks before danger comes." Then he was gone, disappearing as if he had never stood there at all. Clara followed the path and emerged within sight of town, her heart pounding not from fear, but from something closer to awe. In the days that followed, she saw signs of him again and again, footprints near the river that redirected her from unstable banks, a fallen branch arranged to warn her away from rattlesnakes. Once, smoke rising far from town, signaling a fire she avoided before it spread. He never approached her openly again until he did, one evening. As the sun bled red across the horizon, he appeared near the schoolhouse fence. "My name is Taza," he said. "I am a scout." "Clara Whitmore," she replied. They spoke little. Taza explained the rhythms of the land, the way storms moved, how animals warned one another, why certain paths were safer at dusk than dawn. He did not speak of war or grievance. He spoke of balance. "You listen," he observed. "I'm learning," Clara said. Again and again, his words returned to her in quiet moments, reshaping what she thought she knew. He did not teach through force or persuasion, but through patience, through whispers. And though Clara did not yet name it, something inside her had begun to change slowly, carefully, like roots finding water beneath hard ground. The canyon had spoken, and she was finally listening. The town of Red Hollow did not change its mind easily. Clara learned this within her first month as schoolteacher. Fear had settled into the place like dust, fine, stubborn, and stirred up at the slightest disturbance. It lived in conversations held behind closed doors, in glances cast toward the open land. and in the way men's hands rested too close to their rifles when rumors traveled faster than truth, and the rumors were traveling again. "They're moving closer," someone said at the general store. "Scouts were seen by the river," another warned. "It never ends well," a third muttered. Clara stood at the counter, listening. She recognized the pattern now. No names, no proof. Just fear repeating itself until it sounded like fact. She thought of Taza, of his quiet guidance, his steady voice, his care for balance rather than conflict. The stories did not match the man. That realization unsettled her more than the rumors ever had done at the schoolhouse. The children sensed the tension. Lessons faltered. Eyes drifted toward the windows. One small boy asked whether school would close if fighting came. "No," Clara said gently, though she was not entirely sure. "Learning doesn't stop because people are afraid." That afternoon, she walked beyond town again, not recklessly, but with purpose. She followed the canyon path she now knew well. The land felt different here, alive in a way the town refused to acknowledge. She found Taza near the river, crouched beside the water, testing its flow. "They're afraid," Clara said without greeting. Taza nodded. "Fear comes before violence, always. They think you're moving against them." "We are moving with the season," he replied. "The water shifts. The animals follow. So do we." It was the first time he spoke plainly of his people. "They don't see that," Clara said. "They only see danger." Taza looked at her then, truly looked. Seeing requires listening. Again and again those words echoed. Over the next weeks, Clara witnessed truths the town refused to learn. She saw Apache families tend crops along hidden streams, sharing water carefully so the land would not be stripped bare. She watched elders teach children by example rather than command. She learned how trails were chosen to avoid overuse, how silence itself was a form of respect. Nothing she saw resembled savagery, yet fear clung to her too, in quieter ways. She worried what association with Taza might cost her. Whispers followed her now of disloyalty, of foolishness, of a woman forgetting her place. One evening, a shout shattered the town's fragile calm. A settler's cattle had gone missing. Accusations flew before anyone bothered to search. By morning, armed men gathered. Clara stood in the street, heart pounding, as the group prepared to ride out toward Apache land. She knew that the cattle had wandered. She had seen broken fencing days earlier. "This will end badly," she said. Stepping forward, the men barely looked at her. Before she could speak again, Taza appeared at the edge of town, not alone, but with two others, their hands open, their posture non-threatening. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Taza spoke calmly. "The cattle crossed the dry wash. We turned them back toward your grazing land at dawn." Silence followed. A rider returned minutes later with the truth. The cattle were found, unharmed. No one apologized, but no one fired either. That night, Clara sat alone, shaken by how close fear had come to bloodshed. Taza approached quietly. "You stood," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted. "So was I," he replied. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is listening past it. Something softened then, something Clara had guarded since she left the East. The wound she carried did not vanish, but it loosened its grip. She realized that love did not always arrive loudly or suddenly. Sometimes it grew through understanding, through repeated choices to see truth where fear demanded blindness, again and again. The Apache whispered not to conquer her heart, but to teach it how to open. And for the first time, Clara allowed herself to believe that the frontier was not only a place of loss, but a place where something new could take root. Trouble did not announce itself with gunfire. It arrived quietly. Riding on impatience and wounded pride, the men of Red Hollow told themselves they had been proven right to stay armed. even after the cattle were found. Fear, once challenged, did not disappear, it merely changed shape. It hardened. Each near miss became justification. Each peaceful outcome was dismissed as luck. Clara felt it in the air, thick as an approaching storm. Supplies grew scarce as traders avoided the route. The river ran lower than expected. Whispers spread that the Apache were hoarding water, though no one could say where or how. The town council met behind closed doors, emerging with faces set in grim resolve. A decision had been made without her. She learned of it at dusk, when a group of men rode out armed, heading straight toward the canyon paths she knew too well. Clara did not hesitate. She left the schoolhouse, skirts gathered in her fists, heart pounding with a certainty that felt older than fear. She followed the land just as she had been taught, listening to its rise and fall, trusting instinct over panic. She found Taza before the men did. "They're coming," she said breathlessly. "They think violence will solve what fear created." Taza closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing the weight of that truth. "Then blood will call for blood," he said, "and the land will remember." "Help me stop it," Clara pleaded. "Please." He studied her, really studied her, not as a settler, not as a symbol, but as a woman who had chosen again and again to listen. At last he nodded. "We will meet them," he said. "Not with weapons. With truth." They walked together toward the narrow pass where the canyon widened, a place that forced travelers to slow, to see who stood before them. The Apache elders joined them, calm and unarmed, their presence steady as stone. The riders arrived tense and ready, hands tight on reins. Shouts erupted. Accusations flew. Clara stepped forward before fear could take command. "There is not enough water because the season is changing," she said loudly. "Not because it's being stolen. The Apache have been protecting the springs, keeping them from drying out completely." Laughter broke out, sharp and disbelieving. Taza raised his voice not in anger, but in clarity. He explained the land's rhythms, how careless use would leave everyone with nothing. He spoke of shared survival, of balance, of choices that echoed forward. One man scoffed. Another lifted his rifle. The moment stretched thin. Then one of the elders stepped forward and knelt, pressing his palm to the earth. He gestured for the men to do the same. "Listen," he said simply. Against all expectation, one man dismounted. Then another. Slowly, awkwardly, hands touched ground hardened by sun and time. The silence that followed was deeper than fear. They heard it then, not a voice, but understanding. The truth that the land did not belong to one people alone. That survival here demanded cooperation, not conquest. The rifles lowered. No one spoke of victory, only relief. In the days that followed, joint efforts began. Shared water management, protected grazing routes, careful trade. It was not perfect. Distrust did not vanish overnight. But the first bridge had been built, plank by fragile plank. Clara returned to the schoolhouse changed. So did Red Hollow. Taza visited her openly now, no longer a shadow at the edge of town. Children watched him with curiosity instead of fear. He spoke to them of reading tracks, of listening to storms, of learning from mistakes rather than repeating them. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Clara and Taza stood where the canyon opened wide. "You risked much," he said. "Your place. Your safety." "So did you," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Trust always costs something, and gives something back," she said. For the first time since her loss back east, Clara felt the wound in her heart begin to close, not erased, but healed by purpose, by connection, by love that had grown slowly, honestly. Again and again. The Apache had whispered. This time, the land itself answered. Peace did not arrive all at once. It came in small, careful steps like seedlings pressing through dry soil. Red Hollow learned to pause before reaching for fear. The Apache learned which promises would hold and which would need time. And Clara Whitmore found herself standing at the center of a change she had never planned, yet could no longer step away from. The schoolhouse became something new. At first, only a few Apache children arrived, lingering at the doorway with watchful eyes. Clara welcomed them as she did all others, offering chalk and slate without distinction. Lessons slowed, reshaped. She taught letters alongside stories of the land, numbers alongside the rhythms of seasons. Tazia watched from a distance, saying little. "You are teaching more than words," he told her one evening. "I'm learning as much as I teach," Clara replied. The truth of that settled between them, warm and undeniable. As weeks passed, an offer arrived from the east, a letter bearing careful script and the promise of safety. A position at a proper school, familiar streets, predictable days, a life untouched by dust, danger, or difficult choices. Clara held the letter long after reading it. Leaving would be easy, staying would not. She walked the canyon at dusk, seeking clarity. The land felt alive beneath her feet, familiar now, not conquered, not feared, but known. Taza met her where the path narrowed. "You are deciding," he said. "Yes. To stay or go." She nodded. "Both paths carry loss." Taza considered this. "But only one carries your whole heart." The words struck deeper than she expected. "I once believed love was something taken from me," Clara said quietly, "that I had no choice in losing it. And now?" Taza asked. "Now I see it is also something chosen." Again and again. Silence followed, not empty but full. She tore the letter when she returned to the schoolhouse. Not in anger, but in certainty. The choice was made. Clara stayed. The town noticed. Some approved, others never would. But respect began to replace suspicion, slow and earned. Joint harvests followed. Shared celebrations. Children learned together, laughing in languages that no longer stood apart, and love, real love, found its footing. It was not rushed. It did not demand. It grew through shared work, through glances held a moment longer, through understanding spoken without words. Clara and Taza walked the land together, planning lessons, protecting water, shaping a future neither could have imagined alone. One evening, beneath a sky thick with stars, Taza spoke what had long been understood. "You have rooted yourself here." "Yes," Clara said. "With you." He took her hand steady. "Certain." The land had whispered again. This time the answer was clear. Years later, people would say that Red Hollow survived because it learned how to listen, but Clara Whitmore knew the truth was simpler and harder. Survival came from choosing understanding again and again, even when fear offered an easier path. The land had changed, not in its wildness, nor in its harsh beauty, but in how it was treated. The river flowed steadier now, protected by shared agreements rather than guarded by suspicion. Fields were planted with care, not greed. Trails were respected, not overrun. What had once been a border between worlds became a meeting place. At the heart of it all stood the schoolhouse. Its walls were stronger, its windows wider, its doors always open. Children from Red Hollow and nearby Apache families sat side by side, learning letters, history, and the quiet skill of listening. Clara taught reading and arithmetic, but she also taught something harder: how to question fear, how to seek truth before judgment. Taza often visited, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply watching. "Knowledge walks many paths," he would tell the children. "Wisdom listens to them all." Clara smiled every time. Their life together was not free of struggle. There were still disagreements, still voices that clung to old wounds. But love, real love, had taken root where patience and respect had prepared the soil. One morning, as the sun climbed over the canyon walls, Clara and Taza stood at the same place where fear had once nearly turned to violence. The land was quiet, steady. "This is where I first heard the whisper," Clara said. Taza nodded. "The land speaks to those willing to hear it. And to those willing to change," she added. They had chosen one another openly now, not as symbols of peace, not as something fragile to be hidden, but as partners grounded in shared purpose. Their bond was recognized by both communities, not because it erased differences, but because it honored them. That evening, the town gathered. There was food, laughter, music carried on the desert air. Apache elders and settlers shared stories beneath the stars. No speeches were needed. The moment itself was enough. Clara stood beside Taza, watching children chase fireflies, hearing voices blend where silence once held fear. She thought of the woman she had been when she first arrived, wounded, wary, shaped by stories she had never tested. She had come west believing she was bringing knowledge. Instead, she had learned. She leaned into Taza's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing all this?" "Yes," he said gently. "That is why we protect it." The wind moved through the canyon then, familiar and soft. Again and again, the Apache whispered. But now the whisper was no longer only his. It lived in the land, in the people, in the choices made every day to listen rather than fear. Clara closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Love had not arrived suddenly or dramatically. It had grown quietly through trust earned, truths faced, and hearts opened over time. Like the strongest roots, it had taken hold beneath the surface long before anyone could see it, and because it was rooted in understanding, it endured. As the night deepened and the stars burned bright above them, Clara knew she was home, not because the land had changed, but because she had. The frontier had once wounded her. Now, it had healed her. And in the wide, listening silence of the West, love had finally and fully taken root.